Hope everyone is doing well. How are things in New Hampshire?
It's beautiful this morning.
Did you all get the warmer weather in July?
Yeah, for sure. We had a good heat wave in pretty much all of July.
Yeah. It's leveled out now, I hope.
Yeah, it's coming
Good.
back down.
Cool. Good, good.
Just sent it to you. Oh, shit. No wonder I'm not hearing it. I'm sorry. That's interesting. Oh,
Maybe there we go. Well, welcome everyone to our last session in this kind of mini series on it's really sustainability work for recovery community organizations. And today we're going to spend some time with Stephanie Robinson, and I'm super excited. She accepted this opportunity to join us this morning and talk all about planning. When we were discussing the session and we were thinking of kind of like what is all this planning about, I thought of Stephanie because she has many different aspects to her RCO, and those things can't be done without some foresight and planning and bringing your whole team on board too. So it's not just about like the executive director having these kind of secret plans and then delegating. It's about how does our whole team get involved in this planning process so all that weight doesn't land on our shoulders as well, that we have others that are informed and inspired and can support us in all the work that we do. So I'm super excited to have Stephanie with us. You're going to walk away from this morning's talk and just want to be best friends with her because that's what happens when Stephanie shows up. So excited to have you here. So I'm just going to let you loose,
All
Stephanie.
right,
And,
thank you.
in
Thanks
the
for the
background.
introduction. Oh, can I share my screen?
You should be able to now.
Okay, there we go. Um, can you see a regular view or are you seeing presenter view?
We're seeing the presenter view.
Okay, it's fine, Zoom. We're just gonna do that today. That looks good.
Yep,
All
perfect.
right. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Stephanie Robinson. I am the founding executive director of Hope Recovery Community. A little bit about me, I think it's important that before we just jump in to understand kind of the framework from where I come from. I am a person in long-term recovery. So for me, that means I haven't used drugs, alcohol, or engaged in eating disorder behaviors for over 16 years. This is my crew. I have Piper, who is just started second grade, Jacob, seventh grade, and John, who is also a person in long-term recovery. He has 13 years. Don't let him fool you. That fish is no bigger than his children's. He's just learned that if you put the fish closer to the camera, it gets bigger. So you got to work those angles. And our real stars of the show are at the end. That's Bogey and Bruno, our two field spaniels. Who just heard me call their name. So if you hear them in the background, I am the founding executive director at Hope Recovery Community. I also do work for the the Opioid Response Network, the National Peer Recovery Alliance, and work on special projects. I'm working on a collegiate recovery project right now for the Ohio Citizen Advocates for Addiction Recovery. This is my absolute favorite topic because I love all things recovery. I love all things peer support. I have 10 years of experience in peer support, 7 years working in RCOs, direct services. I've done clinical, non-clinical. I've been a supervisor for over 6 years. I love recovery support services, though. I've worked in behavioral health, and I think it's necessary, but I really like the non-clinical recovery support services. Um, I am a founding member of the National Peer Recovery Alliance, and I've done work for SAMHSA. I've written Ohio's peer curriculum. And again, just love all things peers and RCOs. Okay, so I think it's important to start off when we're talking about planning to talk about what I do and what it looks like for us. So I want to talk about our RCO and where we're coming from. So Hope Recovery Community was established in 2018. Um, we opened our first recovery center in 2019, about 6 months before COVID hit. And hold on, my dog. Just give me 1 second. I should have never said his name. I'll be right back.
I have a theory. This is Shannon from the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. I have a theory that recovery people, they're more dog people than cat people.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, all good.
The moment I said his name, he was like looking at me like, help me now. So that's fine. Anyway, so established in 2018, we opened our first recovery community center in 2019. A little bit about us. We're one of 10, and the number is growing, RCOs in the state of Ohio. We support multiple pathways. We now have 4 locations. We employ 30 people. We've helped over 60 people get trained as peers and certified as peers in the state of Ohio, which is monumental because 6 years ago when we started Hope, I was one of 5 certified peers in my county. So we've just like fully built that workforce. We are open 7 days a week, 365 days per year, 100 hours per week. We are really focused on nights and weekends and holidays. So wherever there's gaps in our community, that's where we're going to really thrive and shine. We record about 6,000 to 7,000 recovery touches per month. That's at recovery centers. We have peers in our jail. We have peers in our child welfare system. We average about 70 people a day visiting our main recovery center. We found a gap in transportation, so we do transportation. We started a program for individuals and families impacted by substance use disorders, so we have family support, support groups, meeting, education, outreach, a lot of pro-social activities, and I'm going to show you some of that. Then we run a 24/7 treatment placement resource navigation team that's led by peers. We'll help about 700 people a year connect into permanent services. And then again, we focus on community-based peer support, advocacy at the local, state, and federal level. This is just a snapshot of what the inside of Hope Recovery Community looks like. It's in a house type of building, but nobody lives there. We do recovery housing, but this is not it. Everything is nice, polished. We operate at the most modern standards because we want people to see what they're worth. So we really try to keep things really high level. Then we decided we needed to grow. And so we opened a second location in our county, which is a partnership with a church. We did that 3 years ago. And then after that, we opened our third location, which is another partnership with a church. So we just continue to grow and expand. And then 2 years ago, I shared an idea with a funder about starting a recovery farm. That funder laughed at me in the nicest way possible and told me, I don't know anything about farms. That costs a lot of money. Lo and behold, higher power, God, universe, however you define it, the next day called that funder and said, I have an opportunity to partner with the recovery community. And so we started a farm. When it comes to planning, I'm a firm believer that it's all about the plan. It's actually not about the program itself. So I don't know anything about farms. I have no farming knowledge, but I do know how to build things that don't exist to make them exist. So that when we talk about planning, the program itself isn't really what matters. It's the plan that matters, and how we're going to get there, and how it's going to transpire. So the farm is a perfect example of a place that I knew nothing about. But what I did know about was how to form partnerships. So this is our collaboration. I knew about how to plan. I knew about how to look at what I needed, right? I always think about planning and program development. It's like going on vacation. Most of us can't just get in a car and leave and just start driving, right? We have a destination and we need to figure out how we're going to get there. And then we need to plan if my flight gets delayed, do I have a backup plan? If my car breaks down, right? If I hit bad weather, right? You have to always build that into our plan. And so that's how we tackled the farm. And so our farm is a 17-acre farm. On that farm, on this right-hand side, is a level 2 recovery house, just NAR certified. So 12 men live on that house and live on this farm. When we started, this is what the farm looked like, and it's beautiful. But there was not a lot of farm happening. It had been kind of this abandoned property that was donated to our parks district. So we started to bring it back to life. First, we renovated the inside of this house, and big projects are made up of small plans, in my opinion. So when we're planning, we have this big 40,000-foot view, but we also break it down into smaller projects that are that we can just tackle like we do recovery, kind of that next right thing, one day at a time mentality. So the first thing we needed to do is get this house renovated. So that's where we started. Then we were like, we want to build a garden, not just any garden, a 20,000 square foot garden. Again, I had never really gardened, and I didn't know how to do that. So I had to find those partners. I had to plan through this. We had to lay out what it was going to look like. What was the purpose of it? Why were we building this garden? And this was because we were going to use people in recovery to combat local food insecurities. We started to do bees. Again, I didn't know about that, but we had to plan. We had to get educated. Here's our garden in action. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Last year, we had 1,000 plants. This year, we doubled it to 2,000 plants. So it's a continuous evolution of planning and pivoting and adapting and being able to flow. This garden, last year, we produced over 900 pounds of produce that went to our local community, our local food bank, to combat local food insecurities. So using people in recovery to combat local food insecurities. Our recovery housing residents manage this garden. This year, we just hit over 1,500 pounds of produce. So we doubled that garden. We also just started a free produce pantry at our RCO. So this free pantry outside sits outside. We also realized that just distributing through our food bank wasn't effective. So now we have 3 different distribution channels, right? So we have our original plan and we see that through to action. And then we evaluate every single year our programming and say, okay, where can we do better? Where did we, what was successful? What was not successful? Then we started down the road of chickens. Now we have 25 chickens. The guys built the runs. So not only is planning at the RCO important organizationally, internally, but also we're teaching other people how to plan. So as an executive director, if I can't plan well, it's going to be very hard for me to model that for my staff, who are then modeling that for the community. We create a lot of opportunities for our recovery community to be empowered and get involved. And that means having a strong plan, because we need to be organized, we need to be effective, and they need to feel equipped. I've always noticed that the worst experience I've had when I show up to serve is when there is no plan and I feel like my time is being wasted. So we want to have that plan and we want to be thorough. Here's some cute pictures of our chickens. They've produced 1,000 eggs that have gone into the recovery community. Fill up our bunny, and now we have some goats, right? It's always a good day at 9 a.m. when we're showing pictures of goats. This is Bill and Bob. Our residents take care of our goats. They're named after the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. We do support multiple pathways, but we live 15 minutes from Akron, Ohio. More goats. Goat math is a real thing. And then we had baby goats this past February. And then a donor decided that we needed to expand, and we wanted more animals as well. So then we added a miniature pony. That's Sunny. And then this is Otis, his friend. All of these things come with a plan. Again, I don't know how to take care of a miniature pony. I don't know how to take care of a miniature goat. I never thought when somebody said that you're going to start an RCO that I would have anything to do with ponies and goats. But this is how the world functions that we live in. We are always responding and evolving to our community needs. And then we were able to engage volunteers. We built a hoop house, a barn. We tapped maple syrup trees. Our guys learned to drywall. So we're actually starting a workforce development program. So you can see this farm is always evolving. Years ago, we learned that youth were not being served in our community. So 100 days ago, we started youth services. Big program expansion, big addition. I was like, I'm not going to serve kids. We're going to stick to adults. But planning means that I'm assessing the needs of the community. Planning means that it's a participatory process. I loved that we started this talking about that I can't plan in a silo. This is not all Stephanie's big ideas. This is what my community is telling me that they need through a participatory process. So now we serve kids. We've served 222 kids in the last 100 days. So they're out at the farm. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about recovery. We're doing youth peer support drop-in. We're doing recovery-oriented story times, art projects. We're working with local organizations. We believe at Hope that recovery equals willingness plus opportunity. That's the foundation that we're always based on. And then,
Stephanie,
yeah,
how did you assess the needs of the community? What instruments or what way did you go about that?
yeah. So I'll get to that a little bit later, but I'll talk about it now too. So what we do is we've assessed the needs of the community through town halls, through roundtables, through small groups, focus groups, community-wide surveys to all different stakeholders, social media to be able to get information that way. So we've tried to use all these different channels, and what the community needed 5 years ago when we started looks different. So to me, that's an ongoing process. That participatory process has to be ongoing. We also log all of our phone calls. Anytime somebody calls Hope Recovery Community, we log that phone call. And we can pick kind of what the topic is. And so if we just started to get so many calls for youth services. Hey, where can my kid go? My kid is impacted by SUD. The child adolescent has a family member, right? Can you do some prevention? Can you be a speaker? Can you come to this event? And so we are just constantly seeking that information and listening to our community. But it has to be a real commitment,
Right.
because I think it's easy to get lost in the work and be like, oh, we didn't do a survey this year. And so we try to make a commitment that we're doing ongoing surveys. Programming, we need to be better, but we try to get feedback post programming as well. So we're doing basic evaluations. So we just kind of try to build that into our culture. So my staff is always used to like asking those questions, doing a survey, having an evaluation. Right now in our youth services, we have one question, right? We have one question currently that we're asking kids. We're asking kids because they don't relate to the term substance use disorder, but we're asking kids about addiction. What does addiction mean to you, right? Because so many times at the RCO planning level, we just create what we think people want, but we don't include them in the process, and they're willing to tell us, right? And so that participatory process too has to be at all levels. That has to be part of your strategic plan. It can't just be like, oh, how does this programming sound, right? It has to be open-ended so we can get ideas from the community. 99% of our programming is run by community members. My staff oversees it happening, but it's run by community members who have thought about it themselves. Then this past year, we saw the need to combine and merge with another organization. So we merged with another nonprofit, our housing entity. So now we have 4 recovery housing locations. We have 40 recovery housing beds. Planning for a merge is something that is a very unique experience. That's a whole different planning process and a whole different presentation. But if anybody ever merges with an organization and wants to talk to somebody, you can always reach out. Because when you plan, you have to think about culture. You have to think about your own culture. You have to think about the partner's culture, right? You have to think about communication strategies. You have to think about these things. You have to play that tape all the way through. And emerge is a really hard thing to do. But today we are definitely stronger because we have merged. Our sweet spot is really programming at the RCO. We do like a little bit of everything, but everything has a plan. So we've learned how to start new programming, how to evaluate programming, how to market programming, how to collect data around the programming. So we found a good plan, and then we apply it to all of our like basic programming that happens. We're really into pro-social activities, bingo. We have a cornhole league, a bowling team, 2 softball teams. We fish, we do bees, we do LGBTQ, we do cookouts. So lots and lots of programming. We have career coach drop-in, financial drop-in, mental health. Again, any gap we found, we put together a plan to fill that gap. Some of the things that we've done this year. So lots of programming. We also have a culture. When you talked about that participatory process, we have a culture that welcomes feedback and information. So when you start asking people that information, then they just start coming to you with it because they know our RCO is a safe place to dream big and have big ideas. And a lot of time our community will have an idea, but it stops at the idea, right? Oh, I want to do this, right? But our staff is really taught how to take that idea and that individual and really start to talk through putting together a plan. If somebody comes to me and says, Stephanie, I want to start a bowling league, the first thing I tell them is, okay, let's sit down and put together a plan, right? And we're going to go through the steps of what we do and what that looks like. But we're doing that at a high level. We're also doing that for our local bowling league or somebody that wants to start a meeting, right? We have a plan. We know what we need, what our goals are, and then we figure out how we get to our goals. We're either using our staff or we're using a community member that's a volunteer. So we also offer the family support, life skills, recovery-friendly workplace initiative, special events. We have a basic needs pantry. Again, basic needs pantry just came out from an idea, a dream that we had. We saw a need to provide basic needs in a more empowering way because we were just handing shampoo and conditioner to people like in a plastic bag. So now they have a store that they can walk through and they can shop off shelves. So it's all about the plan and the execution. Everyone here probably has a lot of great ideas, but how do we make those ideas a reality and put them into action? You can see planning leads to strong collaborations and long-term partnerships. So these are all of our current partners, and these are all what started as dreams, then got put together as plans, and then became collaborations, programming, innovation. So it's really been cool. We do a lot of education and outreach. So we're out training people, we're teaching, we do a lot of language training. We do a lot of advocacy. Advocacy is a place that like we have to have a plan and we have to like follow through. I think a lot of times advocacy is a lot of just saying these great things, but like, what are we doing about it, right? So when we talk about planning, it's really about the action behind all of it. What are we doing versus what are we saying? And you can have a really strong advocacy message. You can communicate that. But if you're not doing advocacy, you're going to fall short in the goals that you're trying to meet. All this planning leads to like massive impact. So the RCO, we are able to collect data, report out the impacts we have. We're able to share that with our community. And that's because we had a plan to do that from day one. I think sometimes our downfall is we do too much work in the dark. So much magic happens in RCOs. But the majority of what happens, we don't share. And it's not about tooting our own horn or about ego. It's about we should own our successes and celebrate those. And we also need to share, because we're always looking for a diversified funding stream. I'm looking for people who are interested in coming up alongside my mission. When I write grants, it's nice to have the data right there. Sometimes when I have to go dig for it and look at what we did, it just takes a lot longer. So planning means that from the beginning, I'm aware of the end. I'm aware of how I'm going to collect data. I'm aware of how I'm going to analyze that data, what I'm going to do with that data. And so again, my staff, these type of annual kind of reports like this that we do are not a surprise, because this is how we function through the year. So they are easily able just to pull up those spreadsheets and plug that information in. It's not a mad scramble, because we're planning for the longevity of the project or the program ahead of time. So we did this all in 5 years. And some people will say like, oh, you just say yes to everything. I say no to a ton of stuff. My goal is to do really small, like really, really well. So how did we really make this happen? It's really about planning, and then more planning, and then planning on top of that. Really, I think a lack of planning is the cause of most failures. And I don't use that term failure I don't think failure is a bad word. So I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think a lack of planning causes the most lack of hitting those deliverables or your goals. And you could call that a failure, or you could just call that like an experience that provided you more information, because you could also call that an opportunity. But we have to have a plan. My staff needs to know when they walk in every day, what's going to happen at the RCO, right? There needs to be some predictability there. And people say ideas without action are worthless, and that's a pretty strong statement. But I think there's so many, there's on this call, there's so many great ideas. There's so much wisdom and there's so much knowledge. But sometimes it's hard to get from, oh, I have this idea to this becomes a reality, right? For whatever reason that is, it seems too big. There's too many barriers. Again, it's often just a lack of planning that out and making it smaller, achievable goals. Our goal at Hope Recovery Community is to do small really, really well. That's what we focus on. I've been approached in the last 5 years, I don't know, 10 times to franchise the RCO, to take it out of county, to replicate it other places. And I'm like, RCOs are not pop-up campers. I can't just go marching into another community and think that I have an understanding. I live in the community. I work in the community. I run the RCO. I do recovery. My kids go to school, all in the same community. So I have that sense of that. And 90% of the people that work in my RCO are exactly the same as that. They have different lived experience, but they really get it. I love this. You can have many great ideas in your head, but what makes the difference is the action. Right? Without the action, there'll be no manifestation, no results, and no reward. I always think about the farm, because that one day in the kitchen where I shared that big idea with a funder, most people would have, again, he laughed at me, and I'd had that idea for a couple of years. I didn't share it for those few years, but that's taking action. That's kind of just saying, I'm going to step out here. I'm going to share this idea. I do a lot of that with funders, because the relationships we build are key in the planning process, right? We get ideas at the RCO years in advance. So it's not like things that are just happening. Sometimes things pop up quickly, but youth services was a 3-year conversation, a 3-year dialogue, timeline, planning, strategizing, me refusing for a while, because the timing has to be right. When we merged with that recovery housing entity, that was a 2-year conversation that we put pause on the conversation at one point, because in the planning process, we identified that there were some barriers culturally in the community that we needed to kind of move through. And so it's all about this having this idea in our head, but then taking it to action, right? And And sometimes I've met a lot of people. I've been visited by so many people that want to start RCOs or want to start housing or start, different programs, and they have that big idea, but it just gets stopped there and there's no follow through. And so where do we start, right? Really, we have that idea, then we have to get to the plan, and the plan is really the roadmap, and the courage. The RCO world is really difficult, because usually the plan, entails me wearing 42 different hats. The plan entails me finding money that we don't currently have. The plan is scary. We live in a really conservative community, and so oftentimes the plan means I might be challenging the system a little bit. That's our job. That's how I see the role and function as an RCO. It's just making sure you have that roadmap. It's making sure, like I said, when I go on vacation, I make sure I have that budget. I know where I'm going. I have somewhat of a plan. We're kind of a wing it kind of family, but in general, we know where we're headed, right? And we have, everything secured to get there, to get home. So I see that whole plan all the way through. And at the RCO, it's the same way. We have to have that roadmap. And we have to dream big. I always say, like, we do small really, really well, but we still have these wild dreams. The farm, and that was kind of this crazy big dream. But I've learned that, we have to be able to dream big. We have to think outside the box in recovery community organizations. Recovery to me is the most innovative thing, right? A person takes like things and does them in a different way and gets a better result. Like, that's recovery. We're the most innovative people ever. Yet in the recovery space and in the substance use disorder treatment space, we are very creatures of habit. And we often just repeat the same things. We do the same things over and over again. And sometimes we aren't seeing results. I think at the RCO level, when it comes to plan, we have to be innovative. We have to be able to dream big. And that means that at any given time at Hope Recovery Community, we have like layers of plans happening. So we have things that are long-term, and then things that are short-term. So right now, like at Hope Recovery Community, we have an overdose event coming up. So we have got a special event plan in place. We've got the speakers all lined up, right? We've got chairs, we've got tables, like we've got that down to an art form, but that needs to be spot on. So when people come to my RCO and do an event, I want them to have the best experience ever. We are functioning in the most stigmatized disease in the world. We have got to be great when it comes to putting plans into action. So that's a simple plan. But then at the same time, right now at Hope Recovery Community, we're only placing 20% of people that request recovery housing, 20%, not because of them, but because of us. So I'm in big 40,000 foot conversations about how to really address the need for large recovery housing solution, to double the current housing that I have. So I'm in a plan on that as well, right? So at any given time, we have all these different layers of plans. Again, I love this quote: if I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. That's my viewpoint. That is how we approach planning. We break it down, we make it really tangible, we make it really measurable. And I am going to set us up for success all the time. How can we be successful? When I look at that plan, I don't want to create more pressure, more stress, more barriers, right? So I want to look at that plan from the beginning and say, how can I set up my team for long-term success? So number one, and this seems really obvious, but I have to say it anyway. We must understand who we are. We are recovery community organizations. I travel the country a lot and I talk to a lot of RCOs, and sometimes I feel like there's a misunderstanding of who we really are. and it can get a little bit, this area can get gray. I really want to make sure, and I don't want to talk down to anybody, but I just want to make sure that we all understand like what an RCO is, because to plan programming and to plan projects, to plan expansion and growth, you need to understand who you are and who you aren't. And so that is really important. We have to understand what the RCO definition is, and we have to understand our function. Oftentimes I see, or people, RCOs will call me and they'll ask for me to consult to help them with a project. And the project isn't even aligned with the functions of what an RCO does, right? So if you're planning to do activities that doesn't meet the function of the RCO, that's going to be a really challenging plan. And so you have to make sure that you have this understanding, right? I mean, here's a working definition. I'm not going to read it. Everybody has seen this. But I think we see this in the peer supporter world too. A lack of role clarity is like a big issue. And so it's just really understanding who we are, understanding what RCOs are and what they're not. And sometimes I tell people like, they're like, I don't think I'm an RCO. And I'm like, that's okay. You can be something else or align with what an RCO is. The biggest struggles that we see in Ohio are RCOs trying to be everything to everyone all the time. And I think if you're trying to be everything to everyone, you're nothing to anyone. So really making sure that focus, that mission is really tight, that you're understanding what an RCO is. I think, it's important to understand the culture of your RCO, to understand how you function, to understand if you have a plan that doesn't align with your culture, you're going to have a problem, right? And so all these things have to really line up. So we must understand like our organizational structure and our culture. So I can't tell you how many times I've had RCOs reach out. They have these great plans and they don't even have an org chart to show me like where this like extra staff member would go, who they would report to, where this program would align with, where would it fall under. And so I think it's really important. This is our current org structure. I think it's really important that you have this strong organizational structure to see how does this plan fit in. It has to make sense in your organization, or you are going to create a plan that is just going to create frustration. And every day in the RCO, we get the options. We can be helpful or we can be harmful. In our communities, with our own staff, internally, externally, with ourselves, right? I have little kids and, I have really small achievable goals for them on a regular basis because I want to build their confidence. Set your team, set your organization up for success. So dream big, but set it up for success. In my early days of running an RCO, I remember I would write grants and I would have these huge numbers that we were going to serve. And I would have these small timelines that we were going to do it in. And then I would like have the tightest budget ever. Right. And then I've learned over time that I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. Reasonable timelines, reasonable budgets, realistic people served. And if you go over, fantastic, right? Like don't back yourself in a corner and create these pressure cookers. But understand when you start to plan and when we have an idea in our head. When I started to talk about the recovery farm, for example, or the merging with recovery housing, this org chart existed before any of those happened. So I already had in my mind where these things would go, what pressure it would put on other pieces, right? There's this domino and ripple effect when we add any programming. So we've really got to think that through. But if you don't have a strong org chart, I highly suggest that's like detailed. I highly suggest you get that, because that, at least for me, helps me see how all the pieces are working together. This is our current org chart. I should have included it in here, but I do have another org chart currently. It's not on here, but that is my dream big org chart. So that's where now I have women's housing, family housing, level 1 independent living, and another recovery center put in, because I want to see my org chart today. And then part of my plan is that I want to see the org chart where I'm headed. How am I going to sustain that? I want to make sure that we stay quality in everything that we're doing. Don't want to grow too fast. Who would I need to hire? Do I need to move people around? Is there a way to consolidate jobs? So maybe somebody's part-time. Do they go to full-time? Can we merge, positions? You can only do that if you can see a snapshot of the organization. You'll notice we don't put any names in our org chart either, because we love our people. I love them, but we just look at our organization as roles all the time. So it's not personal, it's something like that. And I don't have to update it if there's a staffing change. So we keep everything really vague in our org charts. Even in our planning, we'll assign tasks, but that's down the road. Early planning is just roles. So it's job titles that we use. So to take an idea to action, you also have to know your organizational structure, and you have to know what an RCO is. These seem basic, but I just see these as being the major hiccups, right? You don't have a clear mission, vision, value, principle, and strategies. Like, you've got to know your organization. I often see people at the RCO level, they want to build houses on quicksand foundations. And like, the house is so needed and it's a great idea, but if the foundation isn't strong, that's your organizational structure, your mission, your vision, you have to have that solid foundation. So if there's some cracks in that today, welcome to the RCO world, number one. I want to be really honest, right? We're all in process here, but really try to work on those foundational pieces to build from. And sometimes I know RCOs, I sometimes feel like I'm building the airplane while I'm flying it at times. And so I think that's a normal feeling. But just have a really clear mission, vision, value, principle, and strategy. And a lot of this is just based on the definition of RCOs. So that means anytime that we have an idea, I have a place to check in with, does this idea, this program, this project, this expansion, do they line up with my mission? Do they add to this vision that we have? Are they in line with my values, core principles, and strategies? If they don't fit, then I am looking at mission drift. So, and mission drift is just what it is. It's where you veer off your original mission. It's generally with good intentions. And a lot of times, I hate to say this, but a lot of times it's money driven. So we see a grant, looks like a great opportunity. It kind of aligns, maybe we can overlap. We just got to be really careful. I'm all about like trying to find grants that support the organization and getting creative and figuring out how to make it work. But again, round peg in a square hole can be problematic. Put stress on the organization, put stress on the executive director, hard to be sustainable when it doesn't align with our mission. Every week, my staff comes to me and is like, hey, there was a tornado in Texas. Can we help the people at the tornado in Texas? And I'm like, I love the people of Texas. I'm so sorry about the tornado, but that's not our mission. Right? And so it's always this continual, I've said people have come and asked us to franchise. That's not our mission. Our mission is not to grow RCOs around the state of Ohio. That's not my mission. That's not my mission. So I have to learn when to say no and when it makes sense. Every great plan does not fit in my organization. It can be the greatest idea in the plan in the world. But if it doesn't align with my mission, vision, values, principles, and strategies, that's going to be problematic. You also should have a strategic plan. I know a lot of RCOs in Ohio they don't have current strategic plans. Probably about half of us do. We did our first strategic plan 3 years into the organization. So we started, and then 3 years later, we did a strategic plan. And it was a 3-year strategic plan. I don't know what the answer is 3 or 5 years. I just know so much happens in 3 years. I can't imagine 5 years. So we did a strategic plan. We would have done it sooner. Our goal was to do it 18 months after we started, but COVID hit. And so strategic planning during a global pandemic did not make sense in any way. But taking time for your board and other members, we have an advisory council, we have a board, and community allies and your stakeholders, taking time to get information and to develop a plan for 3 years of where do we really want to go? What do we really need to address over these 3 years? Is a great exercise. We have to be able to take a look at our organization from 40,000 feet. And it's hard to do that because we get so busy on a day-to-day basis, right? We're running the organization, we're working with the board, we're budgeting, we're writing grants, we're HR, we're accounting, we're all the things a lot of the times. So what we did was, and what I highly suggest, is we hired somebody outside of our organization. So she had like no emotional connection. She was a local person in our community. So we got to support local business, which we do a lot of. That's always part of our planning, is how we can support other local organizations. We took I think it was like an 8-hour day or a 6-hour day. We went off site. We didn't have it at the RCO. We had it somewhere else. We celebrated our successes. We evaluated areas where we thought we could grow and do better. And then she went and put together like a 5-page detailed, this is not it, I didn't want to show you that, but a 5-page detailed strategic plan. But that had these five big goals. So when we're talking about planning, strategic planning is key. So when I go to start something today, or I have an idea today, or somebody in the community says, we want to do this, or we're interested in this, we know if we see a need, I have to go back and say, okay, does this align with my mission? Does it align with what an RCO does? Okay, does it align with my strategic plan? We're getting ready to do our next strategic plan. Yes, which we're all very excited about. It's a hard process. I'm going to not lie. It's not like kumbaya. It's difficult. It should be difficult. But we're going to do another 3-year strategic plan because we've now merged. And you can see we have completed all of these goals. Also, I found that a strategic plan is only as good as the evaluation of it. And so what happened was we did our strategic plan. If I just would have set that on a shelf and been like, well, that's pretty and that's cute and that was fun, we would have never been able to come back to it. We then put this in our governance committee. So our committees all have to establish 3 goals every year. And then every meeting starts with those 3 goals. So we're planning within the committee. And so one of their goals was that they had to follow and update the strategic plan. So every governance committee meeting, we pulled out that 5-page document, we pulled out this document and discussed where we were, our timelines, where we were expected to be in the action steps. That allowed this document to not disappear into the black hole of the RCO world or on my computer, and really made it that this was a valuable exercise. So now my board is like, hey, we're going to take another full day and do a retreat and do a strategic plan. They don't feel like their time was wasted on the last one because we followed through on that plan. We evaluated that plan, and then we have an update for them to start a new plan, right? So, planning really gives people and projects value. Talked about this a little bit, but okay, so we have this idea and we want to put it into action. Does it align, does it fit what an RCO is supposed to be doing? Does it align with my mission? Does it align with our strategic plan? And then have I utilized a participatory process? I think the participatory process is the magic in the RCO. As a person in long-term recovery, I have been exposed to so many programs and so many projects that were created for people in recovery, but they didn't use any lived experience. So they got no participation, no feedback, and you can tell. And so the participatory process is important because I founded my RCO, but I don't want the RCO to be me. It's not me. It's not Stephanie. It's my community. I cannot operate in a silo. I cannot not include my staff. I cannot not hear from my community partners. I need to hear from my community members. I need to hear from people who love my RCO. And guess what? I love to hear from people who aren't a big fan of my RCO. Like, I'm interested. I want to hear from multiple pathways. I want to hear from people who have, abstinence-based recovery, moderation, who are utilizing harm reduction, who have different feelings. We just had marijuana legalized. So that's a topic I'm interested in hearing about, right? I want to hear from people who are interested in youth. I want to hear from these diverse populations, but they have to be part of the participatory process from the beginning. So we have an advisory council that we use as well. So like they're part of our strategic planning, right? And there's like 30 people that sit on that council. We have our town halls. So we have surveys. We're always using that information to feed into all of our decisions that we're making. We don't make decisions and then ask for feedback. We include people in the decision-making process and then the implementation.
So Stephanie,
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt, but how do you select the constituents for the participatory process? I know you have an advisory board, you've got town halls, but to ensure that you're getting, a broad spectrum of interested parties, how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, right? To make sure your participatory process isn't biased, to make
Right.
sure that it's diverse and inclusive and accessible. So we try to have a bunch of different vehicles to participate. So we will do events or anonymous surveys that we put money behind to advertise. So it goes out to a bigger network of individuals. So like anybody can kind of participate in that. And then there's times that we have like targeted populations that we want to make sure are represented. And so we've built relationships with these communities. So then we ask them, hey, kid, we're interested in having somebody from your church at the town hall, or we're interested in somebody from your center or youth or marginalized communities. You know what I mean? So like right now, we're really in the development of women's programming. That's like our thing because most recovery programs were developed by men for men. And so we're just like really trying to create recovery built by women for women. And so again, that's the population we're targeting, but we want diverse women. We want women that all look different, come from different demographics. And so we have to go out into our community and seek and find that. I always hear that phrase, and we teach this, like recovery is impacted by culture, right? That's great. But if you never leave your own culture, you're never actually going to experience that. So my suggestion for RCO leaders is to make sure that you have gone someplace that you're a minority. Make sure you go someplace that it's hard for you to access recovery support services, that you're the new person. Like try to go have that experience elsewhere. And that can really be educational for you to have the experience that somebody else might have at your RCO, that they might look different and they've never done that before, so that's a really good way because everybody loves to say that, well, culture impacts recovery. And that's nice. That's true. But until you step out of your own culture, you don't even get to experience that. So we try to make a really strong effort, and it's an area that we're still working on. So the participatory design means involving the people we're serving through design as participants in the process. So that means we don't just offer programming, right? We have people involved in the decision-making, in the implementation, in the planning process, in the brainstorming. One of my favorite things is to get a bunch of people and sit them around and be like, tell me all of your big ideas. Let's go, right? Like, and then so many of our programs have been formed that way. We had a guy that went through our recovery housing program, and then he's like, hey, I love to bowl. And he's like, but bowling if anybody hasn't gone bowling lately, bowling is become very expensive. And there's a bar at the bowling alley. So he had some reservations about that. So I went to the bowling alley, negotiated a rate. We got some t-shirts, super cute, right? Stay in your own lane, recovery community bowling shirts. And we started a Sunday bowling league. They're on their 3rd year of bowling league. We gave him leadership training. We helped him put together a plan. He showed up that first night. I think there was like 42 or 35 or 42 people there from the recovery community ready to be in a league and bowl. that empowered him. That individual, and I'm not saying it's because of the bullying, but that individual has gone on to start his own company. He now owns a car detailing business, right? And just really empowered. We have a motorcycle group that builds motorcycles, same way, right? Somebody said, I really want to get involved in this. And so as the RCO, my goal is to create opportunity. Recovery equals willingness plus opportunity. All I do every day is create that opportunity, but it takes the idea from them or the idea that we hear, then I have to really put that in action. That's really where I come in as the executive director. So some examples, right? Surveys, polls, evaluations, social media posts, town halls. We did a big general town hall recently, and it was so eye-opening and so amazing that we're going to do specific town halls in 2025. They wanted to do a town hall for justice involved in individuals, and then the navigation of our behavioral health system in our county. Those are some tough topics in our county, but these are what came from this original town hall. Roundtable discussions, focus groups, comment, the good old comment card is always a nice thing. And the keys, like we said, is number one, things have to be accessible. So do not make the assumption that every person has access to internet, data, phones, computers. So we have all different variations. We have to have inclusion and diversity. We have to make sure we're really reaching people. And then feedback at all levels. And we have to include lived experience. So we have to make sure that's part of the dialogue and part of the process. Everything we do, for the most part, we have personal SUD experience, we have family members, community allies. Those are our 3 buckets. But we have to make sure we're including these people. And again, it's a commitment and it's ongoing. So this is something that should be a continuous process. We're trying to get to a place where every month we're doing some sort of ask of the community, right? That it's just more and more built into the culture. What do you like about this? What do you think about this? Would you like to see this? Like right now, again, I have the women. I have a survey that we're disseminating to women, and I'm just like, tell me their challenges. What does it look like to be a woman in recovery? What would you like to see? I know what I'd like to see. That doesn't matter. That is insignificant. What I think they want is not as important as what they actually want. And I will only know if I'm asking those questions, right? I cannot operate in a silo. I have to use my staff. I have to use my stakeholders. I have to use my community members. And I have to make sure that they're able to access and complete whatever I'm asking them easily and effectively. If you have a survey that has 25 questions, nobody wants to fill that out. I'm just telling you, they could be the greatest questions in the world. Less is more. So we don't go over it's 5 questions for our youth. It's literally one question, just one question, right? And I have to make it really easy, and I have to make it fun, and I have to make it that they can write it on a card or they can write it on an iPad, right? However they connect to it, and they have to feel safe. Participation, again, has to feel safe. Trauma informed. So make sure the questions you're asking, the approach you're taking. Again, if you send me a 10-page document asking me for evaluation, that's traumatic that's traumatic for me to even consider. So just make sure you're thinking through that in the participatory process. I heard this quote recently: people take care of what they build. I freaking love that. That is what we're looking for. When people feel part of the process, that they're building this RCO, that's what that's what we are. We are a reflection of the community. We are the voice of recovery. We should represent the people that we're serving, and they really are in charge. They are leading the charge, and they take care of what they build. We have just experienced that at Hope Recovery Community. And I think we all can feel that when we're invested in something. So you have a bright idea, right? You're dreaming big, right? Every idea has to have, again, participatory process, has to be mission focused, has to align with RCO functions, be part of our strategic plan. And this idea cannot function in a silo. When this session started, that was the first thing, right? I cannot sit in some little office and like a chemist just trying to brew these ideas. My RCO is I'm represented in my RCO, but it is not this reflection of myself. There are many things at the RCO that I would never actually participate in. I love that. But other people are really interested in, and so really you can't function in a silo. You have to be including other people in these processes, and it can't just be Stephanie's bright idea, executive director, this is what we're going to do. No, it has to really fall in line with these steps. So this is quick. Generally, right? It took a minute to explain it, but we have an idea, or we have an idea for new programming or expansion. We can easily say, bam, bam, bam. These all align. We're good to go. And then what? Right? So the first thing you really need to do when you talk about action items, right? The first thing is just to define the scope of the project. Again, a lot of times people reach out with ideas and they can't answer why are you doing this? Right? Because they didn't have a participatory process. They can't tell me why, but we need to understand why I'm doing this. What exactly do I want to accomplish? Right? We have to set up some goals. Your goals have to be SMART goals, which means they're measurable. To make my community a better place to live in, that's really sweet and nice, but that is not a measurable goal. I don't know how to define that. So you need to think through this. What are the steps to get there? Do you currently have the staff in place? A big one I ask is, are we informed? So when it was let's start a farm, are we informed? No knowledge of a farm, but I knew that I had partners that were informed. So just because the answer is no, that doesn't mean you don't have to move forward. It just means that you're aware of that's going to be a challenge, right? So I think sometimes people jump into spaces with not, they're not really informed. We don't have to be subject matter experts on everything, but we need to make sure that programs and projects, expansions are places that we're informed. Youth services, for example, the answer was no. When we looked at our scope of project, are you informed? I'm no. So part of the grant that I wrote to start youth services was to get informed. So that's part of our process currently, but we're not developing it. We're not pushing any curriculum. We're not, so we were informed in some areas around youth peer support, but there was other areas that prevention efforts around youth that we aren't informed. So we're getting informed. I think it's good to create a project workflow. How is this project going to work? Again, an idea, you have to break it down into action steps. How exactly are we going to serve youth at Hope Recovery Community? I have adults at my recovery center almost every hour that we're open. So there's always people there. So our workflow meant that the work with youth was not going to happen at our recovery center. So I was okay, I've got an idea. Let's just partner out in the community. So we're going to partner where youth already are. And that barrier that we thought actually ended up being the key to our success. And so when you plan and you're able to identify, these things, that's going to really get your mind going because you're thinking through all the things. What can go right? What can go wrong? Right? Do you need partners? Have you established those relationships? It's very hard to reach out to a group and say, hey, I want to partner on this. I'm going to write it for tomorrow, right? No, it's easy when I can reach out to friends, to partners I've already established. That youth, for example, we established youth partners years ago, just to be able to support kids in general. So when the time came and I was funded for youth services, we had 4 MOUs in place before the day that we were actually awarded the money, right? So we are ready to go. Because we're planning really out in front. Policy and procedure, that's our best friend at the RCO. Do you need additional policy and procedure? I also should have asked about this. Did you check in with your insurance agent and an attorney? Any big growth or expansion, any new activity area we go into, the first person I talk to is my insurance agent. And so when I was listen, we want to start a recovery farm, you can imagine that was an interesting conversation with my insurance company, right? But I need to know when I make that plan, when I create those activities, when we start to take action, what I can and can't do according to my agent. So my agent is hey, your liability insurance is so high, you're fine. As long as you don't ride horses, don't ride any animals. So right there, I know my plan at the farm, there will be no riding of any any animal. So like our pony is a miniature pony, right? You can't ride a miniature pony. So you have to be aware of those things and understand. And then what policy and procedures, right? When we started youth services, we needed a whole new layer of policy and procedures, right? We don't background check our current employees, but we do background check people who are going to work with minors. So we needed new policy and procedures. What did that look like? We love people with really heavy justice involved lived experience. What does that look like around youth? What are we going to go by? What's our policy and procedure in that space? Right? On the farm, we have people that operate heavy machinery. How do we develop that? So that had to go into that. I needed to realize that I'm going to need some different policy and procedures. Or I start women's programming. I don't actually need, that's not that. I don't need a lot of policy and procedure. I don't need any more insurance. I already have the staff in place. They have some extra time, right? So you can see it looks really different for different programs and projects. This is a big one. You have to evaluate your infrastructure. You have to look like, do you have the right platforms in place? Do you have the right systems in place? When we decided to shift or add youth in the farm, we did not alter our infrastructure. And now we're kind of we're putting too much pressure. Our infrastructure isn't really meant to handle what we have. And when I say that infrastructure, I just mean our systems, how we organize, how we house policy and procedure. Like we just bought a new policy and procedure organization system, an online portal. We can do e-signatures, right? Things like that. We just bought a new data collection system because our programs were outpacing our infrastructure. How we collected data was pretty archaic. And so we had to come forward with that. So you have to look at those infrastructures. You know, everyone's favorite word is sustainability. Is this sustainable? Is this sustainable doesn't mean that you have sustainability, settled, because that's just not the world we live in. Like, let's be realistic. I have a ton of my programs that are year to year. But I do have plans that, if I would lose this funding source, how could I still move this forward, right? I always have these cushions and areas, to pull back on if needed, because sometimes the ending of a program can cause harm to a community, right? So you don't want to start things that you can't finish. Lots of people have bright ideas, but can you do that bright idea for the next 10 years? I always ask my staff that question, because they want to do something. And I'm like, okay, we want to feed people. Okay, we want to feed people lunch. Okay, can we do that every day? Can we really do that, right? And if we can't, then we need to scale things back and start small. Oftentimes, our plans for new programming means we start maybe a programming in the end we want to do weekly, we start monthly. Maybe something monthly, we start quarterly, right? And so we work out our kinks through it and see what works and doesn't work. So start small and build from there. Again, having those measurable goals and being really specific and writing it down on a piece of paper. Again, there's lots of templates you can Google and things like that, but like just write it down. Like, just to talk about this and have this all in your brain is not effective, right? We want everybody to be on the same page and we want to be answering these questions. Number 2, we want to create some sort of timeline. Right? If there's a start and there's a finish. And again, somebody would say, what's the farm end game? And I don't have an actual finish, but there's different projects now at the farm that do have end games. And we have seasons. So sometimes that end can be open-ended. And then what milestones do you need to hit along the way? I'm a big believer in short and long-term goals. Again, because I like to build confidence in my team. So if the goal is just to start this massive recovery farm and donate thousands of pounds of produce into our community, that's great, but that feels really big. Our first year was to donate 1 piece of produce. Last year, that's all we wanted to do. I was like, if we get one thing out of the garden, like, we are successful. And we ended up doing 1,000 pounds. Now this year, our goal was 2,000 pounds, right? So it was based on our data from last year, and one thing wouldn't have been a great goal. But to start, they still laugh at me because they're like, Stephanie, remember when you were just 1 piece of produce into the community was a success? Because that meant we had built the foundation. And for us, the plan to start a farm and build a 20,000 square foot garden, that's a massive undertaking. So that in itself, I was like, it's good, right? So you have to really make your goals be realistic and make sense. and then short and long term. Does this fit into our current organizational calendar? This has gotten us a bunch where we have an idea or we write a grant for new programming, and then it falls in a season where we're really busy doing other things. And we didn't kind of take that step back and say, right, we look at that our org chart, but are you also looking at an organizational calendar? We have a one-sheeter that my staff uses that has our big events for every month. So we're able now to look at that and say, okay, so if we start women's programming, we should probably start that, like, there's a, International Women's Day. That might be a good season. We shouldn't do that in September because that's National Recovery Month. And we have a million other things. That's our fundraiser. The middle of winter maybe doesn't make sense. This is when the farm is really busy. So we look at that calendar to make sure that we create a realistic timeline that fits in our organizational calendar that already exists. Don't want to put pressure on the organization. Don't want to push too hard. Oftentimes expansion and growth and new projects and programs mean that current staff are adding to the hats they already wear. So really beware of that. Or you're just adding to your plate. I like to have small plates, right? That don't fit a lot. So I can be really successful with those small plates. Make the timeline realistic. Like I said early on, when I would start programs and projects and write grants, my perfectionism really kicked in, and I was like, okay, we're going to do this faster than anyone. We're going to, start, I really often set these unreasonable timeframes. And then I would really stress myself out and we wouldn't produce the best work. So today I try to be really realistic with lots of cushion. And, if I can, I give seasonal timeframes and not dates anymore. In Ohio, the fall can be a matter of, 9 different months. So it works for us, but I really try to not corner us in. When we opened the farm, I didn't set a hard date and say the farm's going to open on this date. I've learned not to do those types of things when I don't have to, because program development is sloppy and clunky and inconvenient and unpredictable, right? So all of these ideas and all of these plans, you have to take that in mind, is that we've never done this before. And so it's the first time. We start every planning meeting with, I ask for patience and grace from my staff, because I'm like, let's go. Let's put our waders on because we're about to clunk through the muck and it's going to be uncomfortable. And you have to find the right staff who are willing to do that, because lots of people really like well polished machines, which are fine. That is not program development in RCOs, at least for us. Okay. The next thing you got to do is create a budget, right? I know you guys have talked a little bit about this in previous things, but you got to be really honest about like the costs of the program, the categories, administrative costs, leave room for cushion. Don't stress yourself out. And then how much money do you have to work with? How much money? So just make that budget, make it as detailed as possible, make it as early as possible. And really just get honest with that piece. The worst thing to do is to start a new program or to write a grant and then you start losing money on that, or, when you didn't have to. So again, don't operate in a silo. I often will reach out to other RCOs and say, hey, have you written for this before? Do you have a budget that you can share with me? Can you take a look at this? Share with other people, get feedback. My participatory process is not just organizational, it's also personal. I just like that type of leadership style where I'm always using the people around me to help me, because then they reach out and I get to help them, right? And that's how we have to build these partnerships. This is a big one that we spend a lot of time in, which is identifying barriers. I love to talk about success and always plan for like what can go right. But just consider like when things aren't going to go the way that they're supposed to go, because they're not. Perfect plan is great, but like we're in the real world with real people. And so just plan for those barriers. I don't like surprises. So I always try to anticipate what's coming so we can plan ahead of time for that. So really try to get those blinders off. That also can be why you use other people, because sometimes I get tunnel vision, and I kind of just see what I want to see, and I need other people's perspectives, feedback, and ideas. But what could go wrong? What are the potential roadblocks? I like to look at what's a current, like what are current and future challenges that I could face with this. I live in a really conservative community. So anytime we do anything new, sometimes we can get some feedback from the community that we don't like, from the recovery community and the general community. When I started youth services, like, I had to anticipate that there could be some stigma evolved around that. And what does that look like? Is there advocacy efforts needed ahead of time? So, I like to lay in the early planning stages, I'm laying the foundation for what's coming. Again, so people in the community aren't surprised. We've been talking about youth services at Hope Recovery Community for 2 years. So when we announced that, it was like a great day and big news, but it wasn't new news. They knew I was working on that. Right now, really working on the expansion of recovery housing. Sometimes we get not in my backyard in my community. So I make sure anytime I'm out in the public, anytime I'm talking, we're talking about really how we are going to be expanding recovery housing soon. So I'm setting the tone and I'm setting the plan in motion now for anybody who wants to give me a house to become recovery housing and to let my community know this is coming. So again, there's not this big surprise, right? So it just kind of cushions that. I do this with donors, right? Because planning is also around building those relationships. I'm always dropping what I'm looking forward to down the road to donors. So when the ask comes, they're not surprised. That's all part of the planning process. Again, do you have these relationships? And then I like to look at what if we don't do this? Like what's the problem? Like what's the gap? So looking at what happens if we don't take on the risk. Okay, then you create a contingency plan. I like just to have a backup. So, okay, if something goes wrong, where are areas that we can pivot? How will we handle these problems, right? It's just getting out in front. It's just being preventative. Pretending that everything's going to go right all the time is just not, it's not reality. So, a contingency plan. So if I lose staff, if I lose money, if I lose infrastructure and resources, right? If the community has whatever. So just really planning, getting that contingency plan. And then create an evaluation plan, right? Before you start anything, though, you really have to create how you're going to collect data. What are you going to measure? How often? How much? How are you going to measure success? What if you're not hitting your goals? What are you going to do? Right? I have this great idea, but it's not panning out. What do I do? Do I keep doing the same thing, or do we have a plan in place? Who and how data is going to be analyzed. And remember, junk in, junk out when it comes to information. So if you're not putting good stuff in, you're not going to get stuff out. But you have to really understand what does the data really mean, and making sure you have the right people to do that. Will your data lead to your defined goals? I've seen a lot of people that have goals and then they collect data, and these two things don't equal up, right? So those should be best friends. The data should tell me where I'm at with my measurable goals. Evaluation needs to be trauma informed. Again, please, if you're getting feedback from people, don't make that process harmful. And then who's just going to manage the different grant pieces in general? Right? So dream big, set goals, take action. So to finish up, I'm just going to share just 3 lessons that I've learned in this whole planning and starting and running and growing in RCO. Number 1, everyone says business isn't personal. It's just business. All business is personal. The RCO, the business is the most personal. Business is so personal, and I think the best business is really, really personal. So planning is about those relationships. I don't operate in a solo because I have a lot of friends all over the place that want to help and be part of what we're doing. That makes planning and execution so much easier. I could not just start youth services. I don't want to, but I have all these partners that are we want to be part of that. And so it makes the lift for me easier, and it makes it easier to take my idea to action. Same thing with the farm. Failure is not an option. That I don't believe. I believe that failure is not only an option, but it's an absolute requirement. Like, I think failure, we've just given it a bad rap, right? But like all of our real lessons are learned from failure. And it's part of success. Like every week my kids come home from school or whatever, and I always ask them, like, what are you failing at today? Because we've learned in our home that means we're trying new things. And I think RCOs are a great place to be able to try new things in our community if that's what our community desires. Some of those things are not going to work. That doesn't mean I beat up my staff. I say that we're never going to do that again. It means we evaluate, we pivot, we adjust, we learn, and then we're like, okay, we're not going to repeat that, or we're going to repeat it in a different way. I think coming up short of our goals is just an opportunity to be even better. It's just information that we take in. Right. And lastly, like legacy is everything. It's not just everything. It's really the only thing. As a leader of a recovery community organization, I have the opportunity and the privilege to make a mark in my community, to leave a true legacy of cultural change in my community. And that all starts with that planning, right? It all starts with that implementation and that follow through. But we are legacy makers here. And it's just amazing to be part of such a group of individuals that are making such a mark around the country. So it's all about legacy, the legacy of the RCO. So here is some of my information. We have a few minutes and then I have the evaluation code, Shannon. There you are. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Okay. There's a lot of information. You guys are just ready to go make all of your dreams come true. Well, you can always reach out to me to ask anything. And here is the code. I think she's going to drop the link in the chat as well. And then thank you guys very much. Shannon, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie, for this morning and all the information you shared. I will, Stephanie, when you get the chance, send me your slides. I'll make sure everyone here gets slides, recording. I'll also share the evaluation link again if you're not taking it right now. Yeah, and if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap it up. And Chris, if you want to share anything, feel free.
I just wanted to point out the link in the chat. So we just published a sustainability guidebook for recovery community organizations, and it's a really thorough document. And so a lot of the things Stephanie mentioned, the how to do that, is in that book. So templates for work plans, kind of strategic planning down to those really granular everyday work plans. Certainly, I think there's a list of 10 different participatory processes and links to like, how do I do this? How do I do a town hall? How do I do surveys? And so you'll find, I think, a lot of resources to support what she discussed in that guide. I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, and thanks for everyone being here. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.